welcome to this webinar, an introduction to next steps, a longitudinal study in England. And thank you for being interested and joining us. And we're really excited to introduce you to next steps. So I'd like to start with a bit of housekeeping. So could you please keep your cameras off and mics muted at all time? It just helps with the clarity. Please could you use the chat function? And please note that your question will be visible to all attendees. If you have any technical issues, please email us at ioe.clsevents@ucl.ac.uk. And we would be really grateful for your feedback. So if you please follow the link in the chat, you can open it now and complete the survey at the end of the event. That would be fantastic. It helps us improve our training events and is really important to us, so that would be great. And just to point out that we're also recording this session, so it will be available at a later date. So the plan for today is I'm going to briefly tell you about the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, and then Morag's going to talk about next steps, communicate the aims and purposes of next steps, give you some examples of research using the cohort, highlight the types of give you some recent examples, highlight the types of data available during adolescence and into adulthood, including experiences during the COVID pandemic. She's going to talk about some of the themes, the content that's available, for example, educational data, physical health, mental health and well-being, family and employment. Then she'll summarise data enhancements, linked administrative data opportunities, talk a bit about the sample and study design, and describe how to access the data, as well as point you to all the resources that are available to you. And then we'll talk about and highlight the next week, the age 32 content. And then we'll have time at the end for a Q&A session. So in terms of the panel, there will be me. Basically, I'll organise the questions that you send in and put them to the panel. And most importantly is the Next Steps team, which consists of Morag Henderson, who is the principal investigator of Next Steps, Tuba Adeli, who is the survey manager, Sarah Brahil, who is the research data manager, and Alison Wu, who is the study researcher of Next Steps. So please take the opportunity to ask questions from this experienced team. So moving on to CLS. So the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, we are home to 4 national longitudinal cohort studies, which follow the lives of tens of thousands of people. And each of the 4 studies follows large nationally representative groups of people born in a given year or years. By collecting information from the same people over time, as they live their lives, our studies they're powerful resources for answering important research questions, as you'll see with Next Steps. So in terms of the timeline of the studies, the 4 cohorts that we house are the NCDS, the National Child Development Study, who were born in 1958 in Great Britain in the same week. And there was an initial sample of around 17,500. The 1970 British cohort study, again, they were born in a particular week in Great Britain, and there are around 17,000 participants. And the 3rd cohort that we house here is, as well as Next Steps, is the Millennium cohort study, and they were born in the UK from 2000 to 2002, and there are around 19,000 participants in that cohort. So looking specifically at Next Steps, which we're doing today, there is a study of young people living in England who were born in 1989 and 90, and there are just under 16.
Vanessa, your sound has cut out for me. I'm not sure if it's cut out for other people. Try say something again. Yeah, but you're very faint.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, sorry, better. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yep, so they're a young group of people, young people born in the early 1990s, 89, and it's a major national longitudinal study focusing on pathways through the teenage years and transitions into adulthood. It's already been extensively used by analysts and policymakers across government, and there have so far been 8 waves, and currently we're in the field for the next sweep at age 32 and 33. So in addition to the ongoing cohort data collection, over the last 2 years, cohort members have been completing COVID-19 surveys, and there have been 3 waves of data at different stages of the pandemic. During the first national lockdown, when restrictions had been eased in the early autumn 2020, and the third national lockdown in February-March 2021. The surveys were completed online, but in wave 3 there was a little bit of telephone follow-up. And at the time of the COVID surveys, the Next Steps cohort members, they were age 30, moving on to 31. And what makes the CLS COVID surveys unique from most other COVID surveys is that they are embedded in the survey, the main survey, so they can be used with all the wealth of prospective information collected pre-pandemic to investigate outcomes during the pandemic, which is great. They can also be used to look at cross-cohort comparisons because the same questions were asked of all the CLS cohorts. So before we focus on next steps, we wanted to draw your attention to exciting recent developments in the national birth cohorts of which CLS is involved. The first is the early cohort feasibility study, and this is a 2-year funded project by the ESRC, which started in April 2021, and that will test the feasibility of a new UK-wide birth cohort study. So we're very excited about that. The second is the Children of the 2020 study, which is a new nationally representative birth cohort study of babies in England, which has been commissioned by the Department for Education. And this includes babies born from September to November 2021, and is looking to recruit around 8,500 families in mid-2022. And then the COVID social mobility opportunity study, abbreviated to COSMO, and this began in 2021 with a representative sample of young people in year 11 across England. And it tracks the pandemic's effects on year 11 students' life chances and has some comparability, albeit 17 years ago, with Next Steps at year 11. So I'll now pass you on to Morag, who's going to tell you about Next Steps.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. So hi, everyone. I'm Morag Henderson. I'm the PI of Next Steps. So please remember to put your questions in the chat as they pop into your head, and we'll come to those at the end with the live panel. So as Vanessa sort of touched on, Next Steps began in 2004 when study members were in their early adolescence, age 13 to 14, and in year 9. It's different to the other cohorts because they have a specific week or day of birth, a week of birth rather. So when you see us, we'll often use 13/14 or 14/15 because that captures the fact that it's not just 1 week of, that they were born, and it captures the whole school year. They were recruited through schools and surveyed annually from 2004 to 2010 up until the age of 19-20. And then there was a break in the study as it changed the sort of data handlers, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. So the study was restarted at age 25 by the Centre for Longitudinal Studies. And since then, we've got back in touch for those COVID-19 sweeps that Vanessa outlined. And as she said, also, we're currently in the field for the age 32/33 study. So its origins were, it was originally run by the now Department for Education, and it had a strong focus on education transitions and transitions to the labour market at various stages as they aged. We took ownership of the study in 2013 and really saw the value of this cohort because of its positioning as the missing cohort between the 1970 BCS and the MCS. So from age 25 onwards, the resource became much more multidisciplinary with more similarities to the other CLS cohorts that we have here, enabling comparability and understanding more sort of holistically about the cohort members' lives. So the focus currently, both at age 25 and currently age 32, 33, is we're looking at those sort of transitions from early adulthood onwards. So early adulthood is a remarkable time of change in the cohort members' lives. Lots of big decisions are being made about careers, families, housing, health, and many other life decisions. And as they're turning age 32, 33, we would expect to see careers becoming more established, more people making decisions to form their families, and many other opportunities to examine their changes in health and well-being as they age. So here's a sort of an infographic that captures the contents of Next Step survey. These are the currently available sweeps, age 14 to age 25. So you'll see that we've rounded up. So age 13, 14 becomes just age 14. And we have study member or cohort member responses at every sweep. We also have parental responses for the first 4 sweeps of the data between age 14 and 17. We've got some currently available linked data, and I'll say a little bit more in detail about that towards the end of the webinar, including the National Pupil Database, the ILR, the Individual Learning Record, hospital episode statistics, and the Student Loans Company. We also are seeking linkages to other data sources, and again, I'll say a little bit more about that later. You'll note here that the sample started around 15,700. There was a sample boost at wave 4, so it took the number above 16,000 of participants who've ever taken part in the study. But you'll also notice that, unfortunately, those numbers go down as the cohort members have aged and the duration of the study. Now, attrition is a common part of all longitudinal studies, and it's something that as researchers we cannot ignore, although we might like to. And so I'll say a little bit about methods, touch on a few methods to handle issues of attrition, as well as some of the design aspects of the study later also. So I sort of wanted to, before getting into the details of some of the variables and measures and concepts in the data, I wanted to kind of outline some examples of research using Next Steps. It's sort of meant to highlight some of the work that's been done, highlight the potential of the data, and allow you to start thinking about some of the possible outcomes that you'll be interested in looking at, and also some of the independent variables of interest. And I should acknowledge that Alison Wu, who's one of the panel experts, really helped pull these examples together and summarise them, and also some of the tables that I'll show you later about the content. So thank you, Alison. So first, let's look at health behaviour. So I mentioned that Next Steps is sort of its aim was really educational in focus originally, but there are multidisciplinary aspects of both of the longitudinal data and the more recent sweeps that we've produced here at CLS. So Next Steps provides in-depth information on health behaviours, including smoking, substance usage, exercise, and to some extent, and the more latter years, sex. So these papers, the first on the left-hand side shows a study by Gagne and Brown that showed that smokers' usage of e-cigarettes was socially graded. So daily e-cigarette usage is sort of associated with cigarette cessation. So it's seen as a marker of improving healthy lifestyles. And this paper found, among other things, that those with lower occupational status were more likely to use e-cigarettes on a non-daily basis compared to those with higher status occupational groups, meaning that those from higher occupational groups were more likely to be moving more towards a healthy lifestyle through regular e-cigarette usage versus smoking. In addition, this paper by Gagne, Schoen and Sacker shows the power of sort of cross-cohort comparisons and looked at next steps in relation to the 1970 BCS study to compare the generational difference in smoking behaviour. And they found that adults who smoke, that the proportion of young adults who smoked decreased significantly over the cohorts, However, the distribution, the sort of predictors of smoking between the ages of 25 and 26 remained relatively stable. Moving now to mental health, there are many studies that have used next steps to explore the associations between mental health, education, economic activities, and many other outcomes at different life stages. So this paper, published in the APA PsycNet, for example, Simmons and others found that young people's post-16 decisions were associated with changes in mental health and functioning between the ages 15 and 17. So for next steps, cohort members, those without employment, education or training, considered NEET at age 17, reported the poorest mental health. And interestingly, those who continued through academic education, so studying for A-levels, showed a similar pattern with NEET individuals, that is an increase in depression and anxiety, whilst those who transitioned to vocational education or full-time employment experienced a decrease in mental distress. In addition, this paper on the right-hand side by researchers here at UCL found that although we see an association between private schooling and educational attainment, we do not see an association between private schooling and life satisfaction or well-being. So there's no evidence to support a positive association of private schooling on either of these factors in either adolescence or early adulthood. Lastly, just looking at another theme that's important within the Next Step study, looking at social mobility. There's a wealth of research that looks at that uses next steps, looking at different dimensions of social mobility, including income mobility, occupation mobility, and educational mobility. And that could be across generation or within individual over time. And researchers found that some inequalities between disabled and non-disabled people's labour market activity between the ages of 16 and 18. Specifically, this research found that disabled young people had lower labour market participation and were less likely to have upward intergenerational social mobility than their non-disabled peers, so highlighting an important inequality. And the work on the right-hand side, looking at first and family female graduates, or first and family students, this identifies that female graduates earn less than their equivalent female graduates whose parents had a degree. So again, highlighting an important inequality, and you can feel free to find out more information about those on the CLS website. So let's move now to the data by theme. So as Vanessa mentioned at the start of the session, we're going to look at some of the different themes within Next Steps, and these are the things I'm going to focus on today. Obviously, these are not extensive or exhaustive. We have absolutely thousands and thousands of variables and contents of Next Steps. So, you know, these might not hit your main variable of interest. So please do ask questions if you want to know what is in the study, things that we haven't mentioned here. And just to sort of emphasize that the value of looking at the themes in this way is to highlight, firstly, what's available, but also for you to start to consider what your main variable, dependent variable of interest might be, and how you want to explore those relationships with the other exposures that are in the data set. So first, let's look at education. This was the sort of the origin of Next Steps, and I'll just highlight some of the contents within those. I've already mentioned that these tables were pulled together by Alison Wu, so thank you again. And the way to sort of read these tables, you'll see on the sort of horizontal, the age or the sweep. You'll see the list of sort of summary description of the variables that are included in the study, and where you see the sort of target that denotes that the cohort member responded. Where you see the target and the P, it means both the parent and the cohort member responded. And where you only see the P, it's only the parent responded. So you can start to see the relationships that you could track dynamically and change over time, as well as the sort of comparisons that you might be able to make too. So this, just to highlight a few things from this slide. You can see that the subjects and qualifications are well captured longitudinally. So too are higher education plans, intentions and aspirations. Higher education experience is only really relevant for those 18, 19, 20 years. And other aspects that might be useful to you are capturing sort of extra classes or extracurricular activities, both the cohort member and the parent response, as well as school history, so the type of school schools attended up until that point. There are many other parts, including finances for education, but I'm not going to mention all of them. I'm just going to show you these. And obviously these slides will be made available to you after today's webinar for reference. I also want to mention that education is also captured during the COVID-19 surveys, that, as again Vanessa mentioned, that there were 3 sort of web surveys between May 2020 and March 2021. We're trying to think of these not just as sort of COVID specific experiences, but for some of the variables, they're also just a useful way to sort of fill in and understand their experiences more generally as part of their sort of life histories. So for those who were in education during the pandemic years, they were asked about their experiences and satisfaction. Moving now to physical health, there is sort of little in the way of health proper, but quite a lot in the way of health behaviours, which I've shown you already. So you can see here that we have self-assessed general health at age 25. We've got BMI calculated because we've got self-reported height and weight also at age 25, but we don't have those for the earlier sweeps. We've got the hospital episode statistics, and I'll give you a bit more information about what data is available within that data set. We do have, as I mentioned, the behaviour, so physical activity is well captured longitudinally. So too is drugs, smoking and alcohol consumption. Diet is really captured only at age 25, and that's asked about fast foods and fizzy drink consumption and frequency. And we do have quite a well captured longitudinal variable on long-standing illness and whether it has an experience on affecting people's daily activities. So we also have information about the specific illness, which is available on the Secure Data Service. And I'll say a little bit more about that distinction towards the end of today's webinar. Obviously, the COVID-19 surveys, as I've mentioned, will have quite specific COVID questions, but there's also some useful other dimensions, such as self-rated general health, which is captured across those 3 web surveys. But with the COVID sweeps have information on testing, results, symptoms of COVID, extent of compliance with social distancing, whether COVID pandemic experience made it so that it was difficult for people to obtain medical appointments and medications, so sort of healthcare access, and whether they would identify themselves as being defined as a vulnerable group or vulnerable category. In addition to those sort of physical health aspects, we capture health behaviours reasonably universally across those 3 sweeps: smoking and vaping, alcohol consumption, physical activity, diet, sleep, weight, and screen time is only captured at wave 3. So in addition to these self-reports, we also have this quite remarkable resource. So this is the serology surveys. So participants were invited to supply their blood sample to us, and for next steps, we got just over 1,200 participants who actually gave us their blood, and that blood was subsequently tested for antibody tests. Now, these allow us to identify and distinguish between naturally occurring antibodies through the exposure to the virus versus antibodies that occurred through vaccination. So we can see who contracted the virus pre-vaccination, but through real exposure. And it might be quite interesting to look at how that group varies by occupation or gender or ethnicity to understand who was sort of at exposure risk, and then subsequently looking at the vaccination uptake as well. So again, this is comparable across cohorts, so it's not just Next Steps who provided the blood samples, so there's opportunity to do some cross-cohort work there too. This data is directly, and as is most of the Next Steps data, downloadable from the UK data service via the end user license. So this is something that is considered low sensitivity and can be downloaded straight to your computer. Moving on then to mental health and well-being. our penultimate theme. This is reasonably well captured through the Next Steps sort of light course. So we have GHQ, which is a 12-item symptomatic standardized tool for measuring symptoms of mental ill health. It's captured at 14, 16 and 25, and again during those sort of COVID sweeps, which I've just marked here as between 30 and 31. The 12 items capture, for example, experiences and change in anxiety, trouble sleeping, feeling under strain, and ability to concentrate and confidence. And it allows us to track those changes over those periods from early adolescence to early adulthood. And we also measure life satisfaction, which is distinct from mental health. It's considered a cognitive appraisal of life. And it's measured at age 20, 25, and again during the COVID-19 surveys. And just in addition to those that I've already mentioned at the bottom of this slide, in the COVID-19 surveys, we also capture two other measures of mental health. One is the PHQ-2, which is a measure of depression, and asks this question: over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following? How often have you been bothered by the following problems? Little interest or pleasure in doing things, or feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. And that PHQ-2 was asked of all of the cohorts, BCS, NCDS, and MCS, as well as Next Steps. So it allows cross-cohort comparability. And then the generalized anxiety disorder, the GAD2, captures people's experiences of anxiety, feeling nervous or anxious, or not being able to stop or control worrying. In addition to the GHQ-12, which is captured at the same time point, and overall life satisfaction. And we also have the control over life, a kind of measure of locus of control, which might be considered an aspect of mental health and well-being also. So lots of interesting measurement opportunities to compare different tools within the COVID-19 sweeps, but also, as Vanessa mentioned, we have the prior conditions, pre-pandemic conditions, so we can look to see how, let's say, those with poor mental health at age 25 fared during the pandemic versus those who had better mental health at age 25. So we can look at sort of groups and subgroups and how those different trajectories play out. I was wrong. This is the penultimate section. So family and households, this is really capturing who is in the household, what their relationship to the cohort members are. We've got number and age of siblings, relationship to parents, age of parents when cohort member was born, as well as some of the sort of forward-looking fertility intentions, backward-looking pregnancy history, and partnership formation, cohabitation, marriage, divorce, dissolution, and formation again. So looking at some of those changes and dynamic aspects of relationships. So this slide somewhat repeats the previous slide, but there's a few additional things that we capture here. So we know about housing tenure, so the sort of nature of the house that they're living in, language spoken at home, relationships and sexuality are asked sort of as the cohort members become over the age of 18. Social connections, responsibilities for childcare and caring, as well as other reasons for not living with their biological parents. Within the COVID-19 surveys, we asked questions on sort of change in composition. Many people went back to their family home, or others chose to bubble up with other members outside of their normal household. So we capture that during the COVID-19 surveys. Whether they have children and if their childcare and schooling arrangements changed, as well as aspects related to relationship satisfaction and family conflict and household care needs, among others. So lastly, for the themes, we're going to look at employment and resources. This is, I guess, slightly more economic and labour market related. So we capture current activities across all sweeps, both that of the children and the parents, for the first three sweeps. We have an activity history monitor that allows us to fill in the gaps between the sweeps
and asks people to describe what they've been doing in terms of employment, education or training since the previous sweep. So we have these really detailed labour market histories that allow us to see part-time or full-time unemployment periods and therefore
periods of being not in education or employment or training. And we've got the specific questions on reasons for being NEET. So we can observe the status of NEET, but at age 17 to 20, we have a reason why captured. We've got other things like income and benefits, both of the parents and the cohort member as they age through, and some attitudes to work and debt as well. The COVID-19 surveys capture, I think, really interestingly, their sort of changes in financial situation, benefits of receipt, use of the need for sort of rent or mortgage holidays since the pandemic, and the giving or receiving of financial help. We also have the total household income pre-pandemic compared with the current. And as well as that, we have for both the cohort member and the partner, the pre-pandemic occupation hours, contract type and gross pay for both the cohort member and the partner, and also the current. So for each of the sort of respective sweeps, we have information on their current occupation hours, contract, work location and gross pay. So we can see how those things have changed pre and post, as well as key worker status, job satisfaction, and whether people are enjoying working from home. So as I mentioned at the start of this section, it's really not exhaustive. It's a shame I can't just download the whole data set to your brains, but I guess I wanted just to highlight some of the opportunities and alternative methods for searching if I've not touched on the thing that you want to know if it's in the data set right now. So this first approach is using closer discovery. So search for closer discovery. This is a really useful sort of interface that allows you to search either key terms in the questions or key terms in the variable labels. And you can select by study. So you can search for BCS 70 and next steps, or just next steps, and type in this case, I've typed in care. So reasons why they have been in care, and it tells you which sweep, it tells you which study, and it takes you to the link to the questionnaire, and also gives you a sort of high level summary of the frequencies of that variable. So it's a useful starting point. Alternatively, you could download the actual data sets and just search through the variables. You can look for descriptions of the variables in published papers, or download the questionnaires, which are available both on the UK Data Service website and the CLS website, and search for key terms within those. So there's lots of ways for you to do that search, but obviously we're happy to do our best to answer questions on the variables that you might be interested in using at the end of this section. But again, please do keep putting your questions in the chat. So moving now to the next steps data enhancement. So as well as obviously this rich longitudinal resource, there are other sort of plugins, if you like, to enhance our data even further. So the first that I'm going to talk about is the opportunity to do some geospatial analysis. So our cohorts in general have been geocoded, and that allows us to identify the sort of environmental and spatial exposures that the cohort member experienced at that time. So these are usually aggregated to lower super output area, but there is the possibility of looking at more disaggregated or more granular measures if you apply through the Data Access Committee and put forward a proposal for those. So things that can be done and have been done with Next Steps and many of our other cohorts is that our cohort data has been linked to exposures to green space and proximity to green space, proximity to fast food outlets, as well as pollution data. Some other work has looked at distance from home to school, and so sort of commuting time, and other aspects also. So the geospatial data is not available on the UKDS beyond those sorts of lower super output area level information, which allows you to link publicly available data into it yourself, or if you have a specialist request, then we would encourage you to apply through the Data Access Committee, and I'll point you to the links to that towards the end of the session. The other four, they've got their own special slides, so I'll just talk you through those. So the National Pupil Database is a sort of census of all of the exam results in England. And actually, to take part in the Next Step study, participants and their parents had to consent to the NPD linkage. So in theory, it's a universal linkage. It does have good coverage, but it wasn't entirely universal because some were not matched and some have subsequently withdrawn from the study. But it is a very high proportion of those within Next Steps that have been linked, and we can see their Key Stage 2 and 3 results, their GCSE results, their A-level results, as well as some school level variables such as composition, like percentage of students within the school in receipt of free school meals, or percentage composition of ethnic minority students. The reason there's an asterisk next to Key Stage 2 and 3 is that there's some missing data on these variables because private schools are not obliged to report their results to the DFE, and many of them don't complete the SATs because it's not a legal requirement for them. So there is a bit patchy information for Key Stage 2 and 3, but the other variables are reasonably well captured within the NPD. As with the other, this ILR and the HES data that I'm about to talk about, they're all available through secure access on the UKDS, and I'll explain a little bit on how to access that information towards the end. So the individualized learning record is kind of like the NPD, but for vocational education. So this is any training that occurs post 16, post compulsory for this age group. It's a really complex and interesting data set. So it's in long format. You can see detailed qualification types, institution types, subject, duration, so start and end dates. And we have reasonably good coverage. So we got consent at age 25 to make this linkage to the ILR data, and just over 3,500 were matched. And there's a separate user guide to understand more about what is included in the data. Similarly, for the Student Loans Company data, this was released, I think, just over a year ago. There's a specific user guide available for that, which I've put the link here for. There's some work ongoing within CLS that with Charlotte Booth, Claire Crawford, Nasir Raja, and we're aiming to try to establish the extent and the quality of the sample representativeness of this data. So we're comparing some self-report versus the SLC source. So as the name suggests, this captures information on those who've applied for student loans within this cohort. We have consent for about 4,500 participants, and the actual linkage in those who were matched was about 2,400. And there's 4 data sets that are provided within this administrative linkage. The first looks at those who've applied, and that gives us information on the university that they've applied for, the courses applied to, the amount of loan applied for, whether it's a tuition fee loan or a maintenance support loan, or a means tested maintenance support loan. And we've got just over 2,000 of those in our linked data. Second is the SLC payments data. As the name suggests, it's the payments from the Student Loans Company to the cohort member, and it's split across those 14 years from 2007 to 2021. And it captures how much, so the value of the payment, the timing of the payment, whether it was maintenance or tuition fee loans, and some other information on part-time or full-time courses. The third data set is at the point which the cohort member starts to repay the loan. So we can see from this how much they're repaying, and I think there's 2 time points that are summarised within the data. So you can see how much they're bringing their loan down by, and the method in which they're repaying, whether it's just done monthly as a pay-as-you-earn, coming out of their monthly salary, or whether it's a voluntary overpayment or such. and we've got just about close to 2,000 participants in that sample. And the last is the overseas assessment. This is quite a small data set, so just over 100 unique applicants.
And it shows a history of overseas assessments for the applicant, where the applicant is in the process of repaying the loan and has had a successful overseas repayment assessment at some point, so that they have sort of requested a review while they've been overseas.
So work is ongoing, and we hope to publish a working paper soon to help those of you who are interested in using this data and better navigate it. And I can point you to that when it is released. And then lastly, in this sort of data enhancement section, we're looking at the hospital episode statistics. So I'm not going to do this resource fully justice within the short time that I have today, but I wanted to flag that there is a HES specialist webinar video available on the CLS website training pages currently, and there's also lots of user guides available both on the CLS webpage and the UKDS, which includes a wealth of information. So I'd recommend and point you to those resources. For the purpose of today, though, I just thought it'd be useful quickly to show you the different data sets that we have available. We've got admitted patient care, so those who are admitted to hospital for that period, 2007 to 2016. We've got critical care, which are also linked to the APC records between 1997 and 2016. We've got A&E, those who've been taken into A&E between 2009 and 2016, and outpatient care 2003 to 2016. The reason why the durations are slightly different is partly about data availability. It wasn't captured at that time, and also we're continually trying to refresh these, so we're hoping to move beyond 2016 as these approvals are given by the NHS. All of these data sets at a very high level description include information on diagnostic codes, some treatment codes, dates of admission and discharge. So we sort of know the duration of the events and the spells that they've had in hospital. But there's more information, as I say, on the webinar and the user guides for those. We've got consent, and we're able to match about 4,500, and they vary slightly by the data set, as I mentioned. So we've got very few in critical care, over 4,000 outpatients, about 3,700 A&E cohort members, and about 3,000 APC admitted patient care. So this varies quite a bit. But lots of applications have come in to use this data, looking at various incidents and events, such as mental health episodes that have been admitted into hospital, and other sort of very specific diagnoses and illnesses that have been captured. So some really interesting work, hopefully forthcoming. So I mentioned that we have got quite an extensive set of consents asked of our cohort members. The ones in bold here are the ones where we're currently in negotiation with the data holders, the DWP, the HESA data, the UCAS data, the HMRC and Ministry of Justice data, among others. So there's a team in CLS that work tirelessly to negotiate with these data holders to allow us to make those data linkages, and an onward sharing agreement which would allow us to share that data with researchers. And so this is slow work and in the pipeline, and we're always hopeful, and do look out for any news and changes as we make progress on these, but these are somewhat in the pipeline, let's say. Okay, I'm very conscious I'm maybe going to have to go a bit quickly on a few of these last sections. So next steps was a sort of two-stage sampling design. There was a school first sampled by schools, and deprived schools were sampled by a factor of 1.5, oversampled. And then within those schools, the minority ethnic groups were oversampled. So we've got a reasonable representation of ethnic minority groups within the data, in particular because there was also an ethnic boost at wave 4. Some of the independent schools and PRUs were sampled slightly differently, but what that means for users is that you need to take into account the sample design. So to do that, we recommend using the design weights. And there's the primary sampling unit, and the design weight is named SAMP PSU within the next steps data, and the strata is the SAMP stratum. So we encourage you to use those design weights in your analysis. I mentioned before that obviously attrition is a big part and an unfortunate part, but a reality of longitudinal studies. And it's basically anybody who chooses to withdraw from the study through either non-contact, refusal, or inability to answer the questions. So through unit non-response, another term for attrition, it might not be permanent, but it does have some important implications for our analysis. So we encourage you to adjust the sample composition by using attrition weights. And again, these are supplied within next steps.
It basically just means giving more importance to a particular group. And again,
the overall attrition weights are calculated, the overall weights are calculated by multiplying the design weights with the attrition weights. And so this is the attrition weight, the wave 8 FINWT for the age 25 sweep. And they all have each sweep has their own prefix. So there's wave 1, 2, 3, etc. So to choose the correct weight, you should basically use the weight that corresponds to the most recent wave of data that you're using. So if you're using information on, let's say, parents or health from 1, 2, and 5, as well as 8, then you should use the wave 8 weights in your analysis. So here's an example data code where you're setting the overall weight using the W8 fin weight and the primary sampling unit SAMP PSU and the strata, the SAMP stratum. So just encourage you to look at some of the user guides on this topic, because obviously there'll be a bit more information. Obviously, attrition is part of an issue of missing data. There's also unit item non-response where some people don't answer specific questions, and weights is just one way to deal with the universe of challenges of dealing with missing data, but there are many others. CLS has lots of documentation on this, including the missing data strategy document, which was written specifically for the 1958 cohort, but can be applied to next steps, and I think is informative and useful for that. But also I wanted to flag that next week there's a training event that looks specifically at handling missing data in the British cohort studies. So I think it's still open for registration next week. Okay, let's point you to some of the available resources. The CLS Next Steps web page is a good starting point. There's user guides, questionnaires, documentation, technical reports, data dictionaries. You can download the actual data from the UKDS. You just need to register, set up an account, search for next steps and request to download it. The sort of non-sensitive information is available on end user license and can be downloaded immediately. For anything that's secure access, so the attainment, the NPD records, the linked administrative records, or the geographic information, you need to write a proposal and complete the training, and the process is outlined there. But also there's a process for accessing other specialist data through the CLS route. So the Data Access Committee and the instructions are here. Briefly, just to say, the age 32 contents, you should expect to see the repeat of many of the interesting themes that we've highlighted today, but also we're asking questions on the childhood circumstances, fertility histories and intentions. We have for the first time a sort of cognitive assessment, which is a working memory test, which will hopefully be a baseline for future cognitive decline, but also maybe an outcome in and of itself. And excitedly, we're collecting saliva for the first time on next steps, and we have funding for the DNA extraction and genotyping, which will allow some really interesting social and genetic work to come. The fieldwork is due to finish over the summer, and the data deposit should be around May 2024.